Start to follow your curiosities. If you've been curious about looking into that one topic or taking that one class or listening to that one podcast or maybe working with that one coach or healer or going into therapy or, calling that friend and sharing about your experience, even though you don't really have a reason to tell them, but you just kind of feel like you should, like, follow those curiosities and just see what happens, right?
Yeah.
That's where we start to let a lot of magic in, and that's where we find our like next step, because we only ever get one step ahead, maybe two steps, right? Like
Mm.
all you need to know is the next step. You don't need to see the whole path of how you go from point A to point B. That's just not never how it's going to work. So where you get your next step is really in your body, and from those places of curiosity and passion and inspiration. And again, give yourself a little bit of grace.
Hello, hello, and welcome back to Journey of a Fearless Female. I am your host, Paola Rosser, and this week my guest is Bree, also known as Healing with Bree on social media. She's a sought-after channeler, healer, and gifted soul alignment coach who quickly and powerfully activates people to the transformation of their beliefs and patterns so that they can step into their alignment with their souls and create lives of abundance, bliss, and purpose. Everybody, please welcome Bree. Hi, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
All right, let's get started. I cannot wait because you're actually my very first channeler on my show, I think. So I'm excited to hear your
Wow.
journey. I am so curious. This is something that like I'm down the rabbit hole with all the time.
Hmm.
So I'm sure that my audience is curious as well. So let's get started. How did your journey begin as a fearless female?
I love the tagline of your podcast too, Fearless Female. There's just so much really cool energy in that. So thank you again for having me. My story coming into this, I love to start off by explaining that I did not start in a spiritual world at all. I actually grew up in a very dogmatically religious environment, like a very Christian sort of environment. And some people ask too, like, oh, did you have like really strong psychic gifts when you were a kid? Because sometimes you hear about people who have, really powerful psychic, intuitive sort of gifts in adulthood, and they have these crazy stories about seeing people and talking to people and all that kind of stuff. And I don't have a lot of memories of my young childhood, so I don't identify with having that story of being like, oh yeah, I was talking and seeing to people. Like that wasn't my story, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is actually a really cool thing, because I've heard from talking with people that that kind of helps give them a little bit of hope that maybe they are also as gifted as everybody else, which I really do believe to be true. So anyway, back to my story. Um, Grew up in a very Christian household, and really I was like the quintessential like high performer, do it all. Like, I had my sights set on going to college. I was going to be a veterinarian, like just straight A's, you know, fill in the blanks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was super into the religious stuff too, which is really funny looking back on it. And I really feel like that was because I was always spiritually inclined. That was always like that perspective was always something that really interested me on like a personal essence level, and
Yeah.
that's what I had at the time. That was the formula that I was given to say, this is how you're good and this is how you get approval, which really, when you're young, equals safety, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the formula that's going to make you happy. Like, do really well in school, do these high performing jobs, subscribe to this kind of, belief system, and then you're good to go. And I was like, great, let's do it. I got this, right?
Yeah.
Went to college, and, was in for a couple years studying animal science, actually up at UC Davis. And the anxiety and the burnout started to set in then,
Mm.
and the depression. Really, I didn't have these names for it at the time, but I did. And that's when I started questioning things. I was in a much more diverse group of people than where I grew up, and so even just questions about like socially what I was taught in that community that I grew up in started to question, like, wait a minute, like, I don't know that that's necessarily true. These all these other perspectives, and like this feels true and this person's like, things started to get challenged.
Mm-hmm.
I was really unhappy and I thought, okay, I don't know that I want to go spend, another 4 years at that school and all this money. Like, I don't know if I got it in me. I switched majors to major in communication and ended up minoring in animal science, went on a totally different path, went into the corporate world, was doing like IT recruiting and IT sales for like a while and was like arguably successful in that, but still really struggling with anxiety and depression and all that kind of stuff. But meanwhile, studying like more about psychology and personal development and starting to get into that. And I moved down to LA with my then husband, now my then boyfriend, now husband.
Okay.
And I landed this huge project, was able to really be very well off financially. And I had that kind of dark night of the soul where I was like, wait a minute. I did all the things that people said were going to make me happy. I did all the things that people said were going to make me feel fulfilled. And I feel the most lost. I feel
Mm.
the most sad. I feel the most anxious that I've ever felt in my life. Like they lied to me. They lied, you know?
Yeah.
And I had this moment where I was like, I don't even remember what it feels like to wake up feeling just happy. And I know that I used to feel that way. Like, where did it go? Like, what happened? You
Yeah.
know? And everything just started from that point on because I said to myself, I'm ready to feel different. Like, I'm done feeling this way and I'm ready to do all the things that I need to do to start to feel like happy and like good again, you know?
Yeah.
And I'd been so curious, and really that curiosity I now would call my intuition. I was
Yes.
feeling very curious about things like meditation and about chakras. And I had like this yoga studio that I was going to, and they were talking about like astrology and all this kind of stuff, right? And I was like, okay, I'm going to try everything because I'm ready to not feel this way, right? Like once I
Yeah.
decided it was a thing, it was a thing. I went back to therapy. I got back on antidepressants for a minute. Like I was like, we're done with this,
We're gonna try it all.
100%. And it just was a crazy time. And it was like little by little, I started to learn about all of these different things that really sparked something in me that were really like, ooh, I love this. This feels really good, right? There was a
Yeah.
lot of deconstructing that had to go on at that time because, of course, I had been raised in an ideology that taught me that anything that was not this interpretation of this particular text was evil, like literally.
Yeah.
And so for me to come into things that were finally giving me peace and finally giving me hope and joy and felt good to me, for
Yes.
those to be the things that had been I raised thinking were made me evil or made me bad, like that was a whole trip to go through. And then there was also like, all of the healing work that happens when
Yes.
you're facing your anxieties and you're facing your fears, right? And then one of the things that really changed the game for me is one of my coworkers at the time. She was into astrology. I didn't know much about it other than I was a Virgo sun, right? And she looks at my chart and she's like, "Oh, you have a Pisces midheaven and you have a Pisces moon." And I was like, "Well, like, what does that mean?" And she goes, "That means that your legacy, you're meant to be a healer." And that word, like, was somebody like rang a gong in me. It was like
Wow.
healer. I had so many cool synchronicities after that. And that felt like it like woke something in me. Like it like
Yeah.
something I couldn't forget. I couldn't unsee, you
Oh
know?
my gosh. Okay, so before you move on, let's go
Yeah.
back because there's so much beauty to your journey. I love that you said, you started to have these questions and you started to
Mhm,
question. I love that you went to college and you had like a whole new view.
mhm,
I think people who grow up in the church and they have a community of, church friends and stuff, and it isn't until you get exposed to a different environment that you start to be brave enough to question what you were programmed to believe. Like you said, the early ideologies. But let's talk about the beginning part of you starting to allow yourself to discover these new modalities or these new ways of thinking because like, I would love to hear because I'm the same way. I grew up Christian, and I mean, even creating this beautiful meditation center, like little corner in my room, was hard for me. It
mhm,
was hard because, I grew up thinking you can't meditate, you can't have crystals, you can't think about the tarot cards, you can't
mhm,
look at astrology, don't even
mhm.
think about going to a shamanic healer. They're the devil. Like
Uh-huh.
what was your first like inclination? Did you have some of that same fear? And did your parents or anybody in your old community tell you, don't you dare go down that route?
I love this is such a good question, and it's something I really love talking about. It kind of happened over time, I guess is the best way to say it. I don't know that it was an all at once thing. And I think that was good because my body needed to take one little step at a time to feel safe around it, right? Which is
Yeah.
usually how that happens for all of us. First, when I went to college, I kind of stopped going to church stuff, honestly, because it wasn't feeling right. Like
Mm.
some of the things that ideology, and I just say that for the community I came from. Of course, I acknowledge that everybody can have a lot of different experiences with something like Christianity or the church or whatever, and that's great. My experience was that there was a lot of judgment for, queer people, or there was a lot of judgment for, different like groups and this and all that kind of stuff. And even at that time, that didn't feel true to me. That didn't feel right. I had a lot
Mm.
of questions about that,
Yeah.
And so I took a step back. And so I had started to get a little bit of distance from that community and that ideology, even in college, right? I feel
Hmm.
like that was probably step one. And then I gained a little bit more confidence in my own ability to critically think about things, like come to conclusions about things. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
another thing I've gone back and I've realized was that my experiences with that community is that it told you not to critically think about things.
Yes.
And for you to critically think about things meant that the devil was influencing you or that you were not having faith or, basically like reinforcing you to stay and to not like don't question anything, which again just didn't really feel right to me.
Hmm.
Um, because to me, logically, I'm like, if it's really true, I should be able to question it from any point of view and it would still be true, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I like a little distance was like having more confidence in my own ability to think about things and come to conclusions and find what felt true for me because I knew in my heart of hearts, like I'm not a bad person. I'm actually a very compassionate and very loving person. And in fact, when I was following what I was told in that ideology, I was acting in ways that didn't feel loving. And that didn't
Yes.
feel right to me. And I'm like, wait a minute, but I want to act in a way that feels really authentic and feels really loving. And I'm meeting people that I've been told I should think a certain thing about, but I have relationships with them. I get to know them like
Yeah.
face to face. And it's a very different story. And I trust what I'm experiencing with them firsthand more than I'm questioning what some dude has told me. You know what I mean? So it was kind of like that process
Yes.
first. And that I think let me be just open enough for me to do something like meditation. And again, I kind of have this like, I love the way that science and spirituality come together. I have a
Me
very like
too.
practical way that I think, again, especially with my Virgo sun. And so, I looked into meditation and like there's a lot of science behind meditation. There's nothing inherently like moral about meditation at all. It's kind of like the same as like brushing your teeth. It's just like a thing
Yeah.
that you do to help with your health. And so I'm like, okay, I can get behind like meditation. And I was having these experiences. And then I'm like, okay, like let me learn about chakras. I'm curious about it. Like, what is that? And I was reading and I was like, okay, wait, this kind of makes sense. And let me try it out myself. And oh, wait, I had this cool experience. So it was like little by little, again, letting myself be curious and letting myself have my own experience with something and how I felt about that. I did, I mean, I didn't have like such overt experiences with people from my like
Christian
community where I
community.
grew up, like
Yeah.
pointing fingers, but I felt it, like I
Yeah.
felt it. And with my family, I feel like they really tried to be supportive and they've tried to be supportive in their own way, which I appreciate. So I never got like the arguments with them, like, this is so evil, like, what are you doing? But I was having those conversations in my head because they had clearly taught me a certain thing. Like, I knew what they were thinking, like, I know exactly what their ideology is. They taught it to me.
Yeah.
But so their MO was kind of to like not really talk about it and just be like, "Oh, that's great." It wasn't
Yeah.
until very recently, after a period of us being no contact, that we actually had a conversation about, look, I don't want to assume what you think about what I do now for work, right? So I'm going to give you the chance to tell me how do you feel about it, and let me tell you how I feel about it, and let's figure out if there's a way that we can have an understanding that's both respectful of everybody's viewpoints. You know what I mean? So all of that to say, I didn't have like a overt conflict, but I
Yeah.
still really felt the impact of the judgment that that community has about the things that I was then curious about and now do literally for work, you know?
Yeah. It's so hypocritical for that community that like says like, oh, we're about Jesus's love and all this stuff, but yet we hate this certain group of people, or if you don't say this certain prayer, or if you don't go to this church, then you're not part of our clique. And it's so just opposite of what Jesus actually taught.
Mhm.
And I just, for me, like a same thing, I came to the conclusion that I cannot go to a church where they're standing at a pulpit telling me to hate, like you said, the gays or the transgender community or a certain type of, person that doesn't believe in your type of ideology,
Mhm.
regardless if they were Jewish or Catholic or of a different, religion or a different background. Like it just didn't seem right to me either. And I actually did get a whole bunch of a whole bunch of retaliation against my family who are super deep Christians. But it's for somebody who's listening and watching on YouTube, it like this journey isn't easy to have the awakening experience, to start questioning and to start like opening up yourself to like other possibilities than what you grew up with. It's not an easy journey, but it's so worth it when you figure out like you said, everything that I was taught not to believe in gave me so much more peace.
Mhm.
And yet we're taught that these modalities are of the devil and they're evil and they're demonic. Don't even go there, but they've given you this peace,
Mhm.
which is completely opposite of what you were saying earlier, that you were the most depressed and the
Mhm.
most unhappy that you had ever felt in your life. And yet, like, I don't understand, why wouldn't we promote this way versus
Mhm.
this way that was causing you all of this?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
All right. So tell us a little bit more about, so you started meditating, you started going to
Yes.
yoga, you
That's
started to
where it
learn,
started.
yeah, you started learning more about your birth chart and
Astrology.
astrology, which is such a crazy fact about astrology goes way back, and
Yeah.
the pharaohs were using astrologers.
Yeah, it
Uh,
predates religion. Sorry,
e-
guys, but it does.
exactly. I know it's so hard for people to understand. The stars were here before
Yeah, no, the
all of that.
systems that we started to use like were predated that. Like really, on some level, astrology is just the studying of trends and cycles
Yes. And
and connecting
patterns.
them, yes, and patterns and like connecting them back with other things. And we have literally like thousands and thousands of years worth of data that have created this ability to sort of predict trend. Like, you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
actually, again, the science in me is like, there's a lot to this and it's very interesting. So yes,
Yeah.
I started getting curious about astrology. I was in therapy and I was starting to meditate and do things like yoga. One of the books that changed the game for me was Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, but
Mhm.
specifically, he did a podcast series with Oprah where they were talking about each chapter of the book because his writing is really dense, so it can
Yeah,
take
it's
like
kind
a
of
minute.
boring.
Yeah, it's very dense. It's
Even though
very
I've seen,
intellectual.
yeah, even though I've seen Eckhart Tolle live, like he's still the way the monotone way and the way he speaks, it could put you to sleep.
Yeah, and his writing is even more dense than how he speaks. So
Yeah,
anyway, the conversation with Oprah made it a little bit more accessible, and he was talking about the ego mind and over-identifying with things and the soul and like all of these concepts where I literally was sitting in my car because I was listening to it on audiobook driving to my therapist and I can still see this image in my head, sitting in the car listening to him talking about these things and literally feeling like my head, like my brain was being blown out of my head. Like I was like, what? Like this makes so much sense. Like everything just started activating. Everything started opening up, right?
yeah,
And a lot of like spiritual awakenings in that time. Then I got a tarot deck, which was really crazy because again, a tarot is another one of those things that has this like really like evil, bad connotation. I got this deck that was like purple and had little animals and was like really colorful and really happy, and so I started playing with tarot and again I just started having crazy experiences, like crazy synchronicities all over the place. I started really enjoying it and I started really coming into more of like a spiritual way of thinking about myself in the world, which made more sense to me, like as an individual, and made me feel like I could come back into contact with myself and that I could start to create a life that had a little bit more of that meaning and joy that I was really feeling called towards, right?
yeah.
And I was still doing my corporate job and I mean all of it, I think there's purpose in all of it, and I can look back and I love past Brie and all of the things that she was doing and how hard she was trying and all those kinds of things. I'm so grateful for her. And I, for years, studied all of this stuff, studied astrology and got my energy healings myself and had really cool experiences with those and started to go see channelers and psychics myself and started to have really beautiful experiences where they were offering me wisdom and guidance that really helped me have huge breakthroughs in my life and helped me have a life of more love and
Can you
joy,
talk
right?
about your first person that you went to that wasn't a therapist? You know what
Yes.
I mean? I would
Yes.
love to
Because
hear your
therapists are,
experience.
I love you say that wasn't a therapist because therapists in their own way are channelers. I just have to say, like they're connecting to their intuition and to their sense of what you need to hear in their own empathic, sensitive way that they do. So they are in a way channeling, even if they don't know it. Some probably more than others. So I love that you made that distinction. The first psychic that I went to was a guy named Chris Medina, and I had heard him on a podcast. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it. And I was in this really difficult period in my life. It was actually before I moved to LA, because my boyfriend, then now husband, had moved for his job. I was still up in Sacramento. I was miserable, like
Hmm.
so miserable. And I was like, I just need to know, like, should I move down there? Should I not? Like, what can I do to not be so miserable? And he was great. He was wonderful. I'm trying to remember if he said anything in particular that I still remember now. I don't remember any specifics, but I just remember feeling really encouraged after it.
Hmm.
Really encouraged and really like it pointed back to me, the reading did, you know? Like it
Yeah.
gave me some suggestions and some things that he was picking up on in like my current reality and what might happen, but it was encouraging and pointed back to me. And I was like, okay, see, this wasn't bad. Like this was
Yeah.
fine. Like people are saying this is so bad, right? Um, and it wasn't until a couple years into my journey that I went and saw a healer that's down here in LA that is so gifted. Her name is Scarlett Curtis. She's a channeler and very powerful energy healer. And I went to go see her, and she was like, "Oh, your guides are saying that you've connected with the Akashic Records before, and they really want to invite you to come connect into the Akashic Records again and channel the Akashic Records. Like they would love to work with you in that." And she's like, "I really see that you're going to be a very powerful healer and do channeling work with people. Like you've got a lot of people that you're here to help." And I was like, "Yes, that's what I always thought, but like I just wasn't sure if that was really true, you
Yeah.
know?" And I looked into the Akashic Records and I found a wonderful teacher, Anne Marie Pizarro, who does like a whole thing teaching you like from scratch how to channel as well as how to channel specifically the Akashic Records. Had an incredible experience with that. Um, and by then I had already started my business doing astrology readings because that was kind of my first way that I was channeling was with the language of astrology, you know? So
Hmm.
I had just started with astrology. I had this really cool experience with some friends when I was sharing about astrology, and they're like, Brie, you need to charge people for this. Like, I would pay for you to tell me this kind of stuff about my birth chart. And I was like, that's my sign. I'm starting. Started healing with Brie, doing birth chart consultations, integrated energy healing into that, did the Akashic Records channeling course, did that. And after I did the Akashic Records channeling, like things really took off. Like that was really, it opened me up, I think, to my own sort of breakthroughs in my own channel to maximize my self growth. So many clients, that's still like my number one service that I have right now is my Akashic Records channeling. And then through that work led me into the coaching that I'm doing. So
Hmm.
to just summarize those like years after, I decided I'm not going to be depressed and anxious anymore and let myself follow curiosities. Here I
Yeah.
am, like doing this full time. I left my corporate job last year and like purely focusing on helping heal people and helping them shift their consciousness so that they can really again like align with the soul in the way that wants to bring abundance and authenticity and bliss into your life.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So let's talk a little bit about what would a client expect to experience when they're channeling with you and through the Akashic records? Like, and then first, let's go back. Let's just talk about what the Akashic records are for those people who are
Yeah.
watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify and Apple. Like, what is it? Like, what can, for someone who's never heard of this term, Akashic records, how would you describe it to someone who's never heard of it?
I love this. And I love explaining these kinds of concepts to people who have never heard of spiritual stuff before or like woo-woo mystical stuff because I had never heard of it. I had to learn about all of it in the last 5, 10 years, right? So I love being able to explain it to people. And if you don't mind, I'm going to take it a step back and explain my perspective on what it means to be a channeler. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
So to me, we are source, we are spirit, we are God. Like we're little pieces of that in a human body. We all are, right? And in addition to that, there is source and God and spirit all around us, not just in the material world that we can touch and see and smell, but also in the vibrations and all of the different things that are past what our five senses can
Hmm.
take in, right? So, in all of these dimensions that are past this 3D dimension, there's God and spirit energy around us supporting us literally at all times. Then some of these are beings, some of these are more just energy types, like literally everywhere, right? I my experience tells me that the spirit in us can connect with any of the spirit of God and of source at any time.
Yes.
Any of it. It can because we're made of the same stuff, right? When I say that I'm a channeler, I've practiced and like learned some tools and strategies that help me intentionally connect to one of those kinds of energies and to bring through information, energy, messages to be able to share with people here, person to person in like the human material real world, right? Now, people can channel anything, and technically, mediums are channeling loved ones who have died, right? Or people who channel the angels. They're intentionally channeling the energy of the angels, right? Sometimes people channel pets. Sometimes people channel plants. Like everything has an energy. And in theory, you could connect to the energy of anything and be a telephone, be a channel, be a vessel for the energy and information of that thing to move through you. And it's really just a matter of you receiving it, interpreting it, and then sharing it,
Yeah.
right? So to me, that's what a channel is. Now, for me, I started by channeling the Akashic Records, which this is kind of a crazy concept that I had not heard of until a few years ago. But it's kind of, my mentor explains it in a really cool way. And I myself have a podcast episode all about it. But she describes it as sort of like the supercomputer of the universe, that the field of the Akasha is essentially collecting everything that's happening at every single moment and storing it away from the moment of human existence, the moment of existence of anything, actually, because it's not limited to Earth and to humans, which is also a crazy thing to think about. So, anyway, there's a supercomputer that has the information of everything. When I am doing Akashic Records channeling for people, I am tapping into their personal Akashic Records. So
Hmm.
it's the records of everything that's ever had anything to do with their soul since the moment of their soul's inception. It's like their personal file in the computer, right?
Hmm.
So we're pulling the file, and I'm communicating with the spirit beings that manage the Akashic Records and help relay information from the actual Akashic Records themselves. So this is really, really good for if you're really trying to understand the why behind things, if you're trying to get a better sense and connect to maybe your soul contracts that you have for this incarnation in this life, right? If you're trying to maybe understand some blind spots that you can't really work through and trying to get a different perspective, if you need clarity on something, if you need closure on something, if you need some validation for like what you're meant to do in your path moving forward, there's so much information about your own soul mission and your soul
Yeah.
experience that you've had so far that the Akashic record keepers love to share with you, and they love to like really build you up and help you come back into connection with that source energy within yourself, as well as give you guidance to what you can practically do and practically work on so that you can feel like in your day-to-day life you're a little bit more connected to it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It
Okay.
makes sense to me because I'm down that rabbit hole all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about your first experience of when you actually channeled, and for you, for how does it come in for you? Is it a voice? Is it pictures? Is it sounds like,
Mhm.
um, and were you freaked out by it?
I love this question. Okay, so another element to how channeling in general works. So we have the ability to receive information through many different psychic senses that basically mirror the five senses.
Hmm.
Okay. So if we think about our channel, like you could literally think about it as like a funnel that's over the top of your head and information can drop in, right? The way that we would receive that information and start to interpret it usually falls into one of the five psychic senses. I don't know if you've ever talked about them on the podcast before, but it's
No.
claircognizance, clairvoyance, clairsentience, like all of the clairs, right? And those are the ways that people tend to receive and interpret information. So, for an example, clairsentience is clear feeling, and a lot of people who identify with being very empathic, what they're really saying is that they're receiving intuitive, psychic, energetic information through the sense of feeling, right? So if you walk into a room and like your heart feels like it's like in a break and you're like, wow, somebody feels really heartbroken in this room right now. You're receiving through your psychic sense that the information that somebody is feeling really heartbroken, right?
Yeah.
That would be clairsentience. Clairvoyance is clairsight. So that's probably you getting images. Right? Or
Yeah.
maybe you getting a flash of something in your mind's eye. Obviously, like it's not materializing in front of you, but in the same way that you could imagine a memory, right? Like in your mind's eye, you get a flash of something that has information. That's the sense of which you're receiving this information into your channel. There's also claircognizance, which is clear knowing, which is all of a sudden you just know something. You didn't know it a minute before. You didn't have to do that thing where your brain, you have to think from one part to the next part to the next part to get to the conclusion. Like it's just there. You just know
Yeah.
it,
And I
right?
think women have that a lot because I have women on this podcast who are like, I don't know, I just knew that I had to check his wallet and there was the paper of the girl that he was
100%.
cheating on, you know, like
I
we
bet you
get these
that woman's grandma dropped into her psychic channel and it's received it through claircognizance,
yes.
like
And
said, you got to check it, girl. We've been watching him mess around and we don't want you to get messed around. Here you
right?
go. Dropped it in. She was like, I'm going to follow that feeling. I'm receiving it through my claircognizance channel, even though, of course, she didn't have the language for that. And boom, she was led to
Mhm.
what she needed to know?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a couple other ones that are not quite as common. There's one that's connected to taste. So some people like will get a taste of something that's not actually in their mouth that has to do with some sort of psychic message. Same thing for their sense of smell. And then the last one would be clairaudience, which is you actually hear like a voice in your head. The way that I kind of describe this, because I have had some experience with clairaudience, but that's not my primary clair at this point in time. It's kind of like if somebody played a radio in the room and you could hear it, like that's how Claire audience is, right?
Mm,
And I feel bad too because I know that there's some people in, the mental illness and, the mental health world. It's like, oh my God, you're hearing voices, and that could be maybe a scary thing. Thankfully, that is not how I had my first experiences with it. Because that might have sent me into a little bit of a tailspin. And I feel a lot of compassion for people who have to navigate that because there's so much stigma around having that sort of intuitive experience. So to come back to answer your question, I had been channeling before I had officially got that training, but I just
mhm,
didn't know that's what it was. And I didn't know how to sort of like pause my ego brain, how to like set aside the thinking brain and just receive and share it to let it flow through me. I didn't know how to do that part. So when I started channeling, it was a combination of images, of knowing and feeling. Those are my three primary clairs. So it would be like um, it could be something like I'm getting a visual of the ocean and of waves that feel really choppy. And I have a clear cognizance that what that means is that you're feeling a lot of emotions and they're like churning in you. There's like a anguish, there's an anxiety, and then I might get a sense, wait, is this something to do with your mom? Like the idea of a mom might come in. You know what I mean? And it kind of like is like one thing to another. It might be like that. Sometimes they show me again in a clear voyance like a sentence and it's almost like reading the words, and then
mm,
after I start reading the sentence the words just kind of pass through me, like they're there right before I say them and then I say them and then the next word's there and I just follow the stream of energy to say exactly what they want me to say. Sometimes it's like a feeling. I'm like, oh, I can feel a lot in my legs. You have a lot of root chakra stuff going on. There's a sense of being grounded or being safe that feels a little bit blocked for you. You're releasing a lot of energy there. Or I feel a lot of it in my throat. Like, are you not speaking up for yourself? Are you, kind of doing a people pleasing thing or a codependent thing where you're not really claiming your own experience in your voice and you're letting other people kind of overthrow your throat chakra, right? So it kind of can speak to me and get messages to me in a lot of different ways, which is really beautiful. And I was already kind of doing that before. And again, I just didn't really realize it. And I didn't have some of the tools and discipline to really have the trust that what was coming through was from my channel and not necessarily from my thinking brain. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Yes, it does. It totally makes sense. So I love this. It's funny the way you're describing it is things that like because I'm an emotion and body code practitioner.
Oh, cool.
And I tap into people's subconscious minds,
Mhm.
and as I'm like looking through, what they're holding on to, any negative trapped emotions or misalignments, like I feel stuff in my body.
Mhm.
And now I'm knowing that yes, I guess I am channeling too.
Yeah.
And I'm being more aware of like, what I'm feeling in my body, because my practitioner that taught me was like, if you feel anything, say it out loud because it might mean something to them.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we dismiss a lot of the things that we are feeling or channeling because we're like, was that just my own imagination, or am I, you know what I mean? Like earlier,
Yes.
like when I said that people say, for example, this happened to me too, where when I caught my ex-boyfriend cheating on me, I would have vivid dreams of
Mhm.
like, you have to check this,
Yep.
or he's not telling you the truth. And then I would wake up and I'd be like, wait, was that just a dream, or am I supposed to do this stuff? Like,
Yep, the
so
dreams
we,
are one place we can get a lot of psychic information,
oh,
100%.
oh my gosh, I have to tell you some of I have the most craziest vivid dreams. It's like I live in a whole nother world, and sometimes I can control the dreams.
Do you
And
have like strong water sign or like Pisces
I'm an
placements in your charts?
Aquarius.
Oh, I love that. My husband's an Aquarius rising and Aquarius moon. I love
I'm an
Aquarius.
Aquarius. I've tried to do some astrology, like birth chart stuff, but I don't know what any of it means.
Oh my gosh, we'll have to look it up for
So
you.
so people tell me these things and I'm just kind of like, okay, whatever. But like, yeah, so many different things have happened to me, and I would love to hear some, because earlier in the podcast you said, there were so many synchronicities that happen.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel like those of you who are watching or listening, you dismiss these synchronicities and you call them coincidences, or
Yes.
maybe you logically try to explain them. Can you
Mhm.
tell us some of the synchronicities that you were experiencing?
Oh my gosh, I love this. Well, one of my favorite people that I follow, her name's Eliza Kelly, and she's an astrologer. And her tagline is Tank, which is there are no coincidences. Like that's just the mantra. Like nothing is a coincidence. And I think that's really beautiful because what that means is that you allow everything to have meaning for you. And my personal philosophy is that the universe, God, whatever, again, spirit, however you want to call it, doesn't matter what language you use, is always trying to support you. It's always trying to help you if you can just interpret and be open to the things around you are trying to help you in some way, right? So anyway, into some of the synchronicities. One of the craziest ones, and I feel like when you're first coming into like your intuitive channel and strengthening your intuition, some of your signs kind of have to be bigger for them to impact you because again, you're kind of writing off the little ones, right? And that makes sense. And I
Yeah.
think that that's possible, but you have to be open to letting some big cool stuff happen to you, which also means for those of you who may have been a little bit of like a control freak perfectionist like I was, you have to allow some things to go not according to plan because that's usually how really big synchronicities and miracles and signs come to you. Okay, just as
Yeah.
like a disclaimer. So anyway, I had just had that conversation with that work friend who had said, "Oh, I'd had you have a Pisces midheaven healer, right?" And I was like, "Gosh," I was in therapy, and it was in her house, it was one of the in the rooms in her house, and we were talking about whatever it is that we were talking about. And I told her, I really been thinking about being a healer. Like that's something that's really resonated with me and stuck with me since she said that. And my therapist said, I'm having this really strange feeling to put one of my cats in your lap. And I was like, oh, cool. Like, I'm an animal person. I freaking went to vet school. Like, put an animal in my lap. I don't care, you know? So she goes and she gets with the cat that she was thinking of and she puts him in my lap. And so we're sitting there talking and I'm just petting the cat. I'm looking down at the cat. And I realize that one of its back legs is very enlarged, like probably at least double the size of the other one, if not more,
Oh,
from like the elbow point down. And I asked her, I said, hey, is it normal that his leg would be this enlarged? And she was like, oh, no, like not at all. And so I start to feel around and I realize that there's a band on like the elbow point of the back leg that vets would use to draw blood. Like when, like, you put it all around on your arm, like
they
even
forgot
for
to take it
humans.
off?
Yes. And,
You're
and,
kidding.
I'm not kidding. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, I did not notice that. He was at the vet 3 days ago." And I said, okay,
Oh,
well, if you have some scissors, I can help you cut that off, no problem. And so she went and got some scissors and I helped her cut it off. And then, we're just kind of like massaging his leg to help the circulation get back over there. And we literally sat in silence after that. Because if I had not said, I'm really resonating with healer, and if she had not followed this random piece of intuition to put this one particular cat in my lap, like she might not have noticed that his leg was swelling due to this wrap on the corner, and he could have had more damage to his leg, like who knows, right?
Yeah.
But like what were the odds that like, and I have a history as like specifically in animal science. So I was looking at him with that in mind, right? Noticing all these details, no problem cutting off something really tight on that, like done stuff like that a million times before. Like, what are the friggin' odds of that? You know?
Yeah.
So it was this crazy moment that felt like such a confirmation. Like, yes, healer is right. Like, you are meant to
Mm.
be a healer, 100%. Like, look at the crazy things that happen when you embrace and you claim, I think I have something to do with healing, right?
Yes.
Um, so that was one really big story. But to sort of answer the other part of your question of how might it come up in ways that we would like write it off. Ooh, let my guides bring some examples to me. What are some examples of intuitive feelings that I might have brushed off, but now I'm listening to? Okay, they're saying my body, things in my bodies. Our body is such a huge signal of our intuitive channel. One of our biggest problems not listening to our intuition and our own channel is that we're so disconnected and disassociated from our bodies.
Mm.
100%. Is there a specific example I can share that you would help bring to the top of my mind? Yeah. Okay. There was another um there was another really cool day. Okay, before I get to that, they're saying to round out the body stuff. Um they're saying one of the biggest things that we don't listen to is when our body is telling us we need rest and how
Mm.
important rest is, and that we're putting ourselves in places and spaces that we really don't need to be in, because we're not listening to our body when our body says, hey, can you stay home? Can you rest? Can you take a nap? Can you sleep in a little bit? Right? Like we're keeping ourselves so stimulated and so busy all the time that one, we're too stimulated to hear the intuitive channel because your brain has to be a little quiet in order
Yeah.
to start hearing it. And if you want to hear the very powerful messages, your brain has to be real quiet, right? So we're staying overstimulated and we're not able to tune into what our body is telling us, and our body telling us like, I don't want to go there. That's a message, right? Getting a little bit of anxiety, like, I don't know about that, right? Like the
Mhm.
question of, is this right for me? The answer is always in the body, and we're not asking that into our body, and we're not connected to our body. But the other thing they wanted me to share, I did a whole podcast episode on this. It's called My Day of Miracles. I had the most
Mm.
miraculous shit happen on a day that I was traveling that has ever happened to me. Like this series of events, if one of those things had not happened, the rest of them would not have happened. It's a long, crazy story, but essentially, it was kind of like following my own desires and my own feelings while staying in a state of trust and staying in a state of positivity. That was
Yeah.
like the combination of everything. So at one point, it was like I went to go get up to go check to see if something was in this airport. I left my Kindle that I'd been using back at the spot. So I had to go all the way back to get my Kindle. But with me going back to get my Kindle, I ran into people that I wouldn't have run into that ended up helping me get a hotel because the flight was delayed, and that I didn't even have to pay for a hotel that night. But if I hadn't followed my thing of like, oh, let me go check to see that one thing over there and accidentally left my Kindle, then gone back, like none of it would have happened, you know?
Yeah.
So I feel like our intuition can also lead us through our own desires and through
Yeah.
our own feelings about what we can and should be doing. I just feel like sometimes we repress our own desires, or we're stuck in such anxiety about when things don't go according to plan that we're not really open to the like information and miracles that are trying to show themselves to us through some of the change of plans. Do you know what I'm
Ye
saying?
Yes, I totally know what you're saying. It's like when the people that missed going to work on 9/11, that they missed their
Yes,
train or something happened, and, I always love to say to people who are, like, getting mad because they're running late, I always say, "You are where you're supposed to be exactly right now. You're exactly where
100%.
you're supposed to be." Like,
Yeah.
we're never in a rush, and my husband's very much like the type of person that's like, time is money, we gotta get to point A to point B as fast as possible." And I always tell them, "You're never late, you're always right on time." Like,
Hmm.
there's nothing to be, like, rushing for, like, there's a reason why we're stuck in this traffic, there's a reason why we're not over there just yet, like, I always believe, like, I love that person's tagline, "There are no coincidences," because there isn't. You're on your path of where you're supposed to be, and I think that we fall into the hustle ideology of like, you have to hustle, you have to be up at like 4 or 5, 8, and you have to like do 10 hours of work and you have to grind, grind, grind. But that's not that's not where I feel like I'm flowing with the
Mhm.
universe. I like to tell my husband, I was like, I like to just go where the wind
You've
blows.
got to have Pisces in your chart. I cannot wait to look this up because that's
Oh,
the
well,
most Piscean thing you could
I
ever
know. I
say.
was like, I just love to go where the wind blows. Like, but my
Yeah.
husband's the opposite, where, like, for example, if we're going to Hawaii, like, I just get on a plane and go. My husband's like, we need to figure out what we're going to do on Saturday, what we're going to do Saturday evening, where we're going to go to breakfast. Like, all
Is he a
he's got to have
Virgo?
it. No, he's a Taurus. So he
Oh,
has to have
gotcha. Another
all
earth
of it
sign.
planned out, you know? And I'm like, he's like, if I don't have all of these things, if you don't tell me what I need to do, then and to book all these things, how are we going to know what we're going to do? I'm like, just go where the wind blows. Like
Okay,
to me, I'm just like,
I would love to talk about this for a second because this is one of my favorite things that I do now in my coaching work, right? Is what you're describing is our some of our belief systems that get a little bit wonky when we attach our sense of safety to things like things going according to plan, or if for people
mm,
pleasers never making anybody upset, or like nobody ever thinking anything bad of you, right? Or
mm-hmm,
to our worth being in our productivity, which can bleed into hustle culture, which you better believe, like being in a corporate job and sales roles, like I
mm,
really had to deconstruct like a hustle urgency ideology, right?
yes,
Because I also am, and I lean a little bit more into the, okay, like what is this moment bringing me? There's reason in it. I don't need to be resisting it all the time, but it took me a minute to get to that. And really, like what I hear, even in you describing what your husband's saying, is that he doesn't feel safe if he can't try to anticipate and AKA control what's happening. Because if he can't control it, something might happen that might not be favorable or might not be
yeah,
comfortable. And there's also an inability to manage the discomfort if that comes up, right? Which
mm-hmm,
is which is the default. I just for anybody listening, if you find yourself wanting to avoid situations that are uncomfortable, like of course, right? Like
mm-hmm,
naturally. But if there's like that really deep intrinsic, like I have to like force and control and perfect and all of that kind of energy, really what's happening is that your body has an inability to be in moments of discomfort. Your body has an inability to be in moments of anxiety or anguish or struggle or pain because it feels so deeply unsafe. And I think
yes,
one of the most important things in the kind of at least healing work that I do is that it's very embodied, it's very practical. Like you have to learn to teach your body how to be safe in situations that it was taught originally back in childhood that were
mm,
not safe, right? You have to learn how to get really comfortable working with things like your fears or working with things like pain or suffering or sadness. Like you have to actually teach your body, your nervous system how to do that, and also teach your mind to think differently about it, or else you're always going to be controlled by the things that trigger and generate those feelings within yourself. And you're not going to have freedom in your life. You're not going to have peace in your life. And chances are you're going to be friggin' exhausted all the time because your energy is always being applied to avoid all the
yeah,
things that are scary and you're afraid of, which is so deep in the subconscious, we don't even realize that we're doing it, right?
yeah,
But that is the norm in our culture. And that's another thing that I feel so fascinated doing this kind of like spiritual personal development or self-help work from this spiritual lens is that we actually can give ourselves all the freedom and peace that we want. It's an
mm-hmm,
unlimited thing and nobody's giving it to us except ourselves. It's like the
yes,
degree to which that we can do some of this self-work and we can come into deeper connection with that essence in our heart that is our soul, and we can understand some of that human conditioning and learn the processes for how to start to shift it, that we can free ourselves of being controlled by something like if I get convenienced or if we aren't able to do something we want that one day and what else are we going to do? Like it's our ability to kind of free ourselves from those kinds of anxieties that create the space for us to experience abundance and peace. And if we want to be psychic, then have super psychic powers. Or, if we have some other kind of mission that we want to bring through, having the space to live out that mission. Do you know what I mean?
yes, I totally know what you mean. And when talking about my husband, it just like I know the reason why he is the way he is. I remember like the first three dates that we had, I think it was our second or third date. He had planned to go to this movie theater and we drove to the wrong theater. Like I don't know why, but he just drove maybe he was nervous to be with me, but he drove to the wrong theater and he was like, I can't believe I did this. I messed up. And he was expecting me to like have a blowout. And I was like, it's
Mm.
okay. We'll just go to the other one. Like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, and
Oh,
I just like, I was like, he's like, yeah, but, and I was like, let's just have a glass of wine and relax, and then we'll get in the car and drive to the next place. Like, it's
yeah,
not that big of a deal.
yeah,
And he just didn't understand my carefree, like you said, water sign, maybe,
yeah,
just like go with the flow. It doesn't matter, like,
yeah,
and now he's starting to become more of like, I can't, when he gets into that rigid place, he knows he has to say out loud, like, I can't fuck it up.
yeah.
Like, there's
There's
nothing that
nothing.
he's going to do that's going to make me
100%.
stop loving him or
Yeah.
make me so
Oh,
mad that I'm going to hold on to this anger for years and years on years on end. It's not the type of person to keep score. Once my
yeah,
husband apologizes and I apologize, we move on and it's just like, okay,
yeah,
I'm over it, like the ocean washes over me and it's done,
yeah, 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 yeah.
So it's just, we are a very good couple with the yin and the yang. We're very great together. I love our relationship. We have such an incredible relationship, but we got to
Sounds like
wrap
it's
up.
very healing. Yeah,
It
for
is. It's
him.
for
Yeah,
me and for him. Both of
yeah.
us have healed each other, but there's so many. We could talk for hours because
We
I
could
think you're
talk
just
so
very.
much. We could do more episodes on all
Oh
these
yes,
other
girl.
topics. Like we could have so much fun.
I
100%.
know, but okay, so we need to wrap it up. But as we wrap up this episode, I ask every single one of my guests, what would be your nugget of wisdom for someone, because you've had quite the journey for
Hmm.
someone who is in that point in their life where they are miserable
Hmm.
and they are not happy and they're waking up thinking there's got to be more than just going to my 9 to 5, sitting in traffic,
Hmm.
and like there's got to be more. How do they start looking for the more?
Mm. Well, I just want to say first that, like, if you are in that place where you feel like you've hit that wall, or you're in that dark night of the soul, or you're feeling like really deep in the despair or anxiety and you just don't know how to get out, like, I am sending you so much compassion. That is such a hard place to be in. And the fact that it feels hard and painful does not mean that there's anything wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. Nothing is wrong with you. Like, you're not doing anything wrong. You're not flawed. Like, it makes total sense that you feel the way that you do. It makes complete sense that you feel the way that you do, right? So I just want to start by genuinely like giving that compassion to you if you've not had somebody say that to you, if you've not heard that, if you've not learned to be able to give that to yourself. In terms of some of the next steps, there's a couple things that stand out to me. One, that process of starting to connect with your intuition, which is connecting with your body and its signals it's trying to give you, and connecting with your curiosities and the things that excite you and your passions. Those are where your intuition speaks. And those, I like to think of them as like it's your own personal little compass of where to go next to get to where you want to go. Right.
Mm,
So your compass signal is going to tell you your next step, and that's going to be different than what my next step was. Right. And that's the beauty of it. You're going to find your perfect path when you're listening to that own little voice. So I would ask yourself, what signals has my body been telling me? And am I tired?
mm-hmm,
Do I want to go out in the sunshine more? Do I want to be more connected with maybe some family and friends? Like start to like, deepen into that. Do I feel like my body needs to be nourished a little bit better? Do I need to focus a little bit on the nutrients that I'm giving my body? Um, am I around people that are making me feel unsafe? Do I need to make some distance around them? Like listen to some of the body's signals it's trying to give you about the needs and the wants that you have that are going unmet. And then start to follow your curiosities. If you've been curious about looking into that one topic or taking that one class or listening to that one podcast or maybe working with that one coach or healer or going into therapy or, calling that friend and sharing about your experience, even though you don't really have a reason to tell them, but you just kind of feel like you should, like follow those curiosities and just see what happens. Right.
yeah.
That's where we start to let a lot of magic in. And that's where we find our like next step because we only ever get one step ahead, maybe two steps, right? Like
Mm,
all you need to know is the next step. You don't need to see the whole path of how you go from point A to point B. That's just not whatever how it's going to work. So where you get your next step is really in your body and from those places of curiosity and passion and passion and inspiration. And again, give yourself a little bit of grace. A lot of times we shame ourselves when we're in places of anxiety and sadness and depression and anguish or whatever. And maybe consider, what if there's nothing inherently wrong with me? I just need a new way of relating to myself in the world. What if
mm,
there's not a character flaw? I'm not defective. What if
yes.
it's not that? what if there's just like a part in the formula that I'm using to live life that needs to be adjusted? What if it's just as simple as that? And what would it look like for me to really be open and maybe ask my guides or my angels or whatever you want to call it, like, please show me the next thing that I could just adjust to create an experience that feels more joyful? Or what's this piece of information I need to that I could learn that would help me embody more energy or would help me embody more love, right? Like if it's just thinking about it like that can be really helpful and take a little bit of that pressure off.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so how can my audience find you and work with you?
Yes, I would love to stay connected with anybody who really resonates. My website, healingwithbree.net, is always going to have the most up-to-date services and offerings that I have. So that's a surefire way. Um, my main social media platform is Healing with Bree. It's a really fun time. I do like random card pulls and stories. Sometimes we'll like DM messages that I'm getting through there too. If it's something that, is through like a question box or something I listed, I do like weekly card pulls and channeled messages. I post clips from my podcast. We like it's a really fun time. I do like really funny memes like on there because I love to have a good little laugh. So Healing with Bree on Instagram. I would also say too that the services that I'm offering right now, my main thing that I'm focusing on is this soul alignment coaching, which is really like deep healing coaching, right? So of course it's not therapy. I'm not going to say that I'm not a trained therapist, but my clients have described it as like therapy on steroids. Like in a 3 month
Mm,
program or 6 month program with me, they've been able to literally rewire their beliefs and do deep healing in their body to release patterns and start to create very prominent transformation in their life in 6 months or 3 months that they were never able to get to in years of talk therapy. You know what I mean?
yes.
There's just kind of a different level you can come at it when you're open to different modalities that resonate with you, right?
Yeah.
So I offer single sessions if there's like one particular trigger you're trying to work through or there's one particular blind spot, 90-minute sessions, and I offer those one-on-one 3 or 6 month programs. And I'm about to launch my first group program that's going to start in March of 2024. That's called Flow
Wow.
Master. So it's going to be a
Ooh.
6 month group program where I'm teaching everybody my formula for how to tap into the energy of ease and flow with the universe. There's going to be
Mhm.
elements of how you can master your triggers and create safety in your body and how you can feel like you're in a sense of flow, not only in your normal days, but also when shit starts to feel a little rough, right? Or
Yeah.
like when big stuff happens, how to find your center and how to stay in an energy of flow. Because really, what that's giving you is one, that sense of freedom and peace in your life that you want. And two, it's helping you be so magnetic for your goals and your desires and the things that you're manifesting. So I'm doing a whole 6 month group program teaching everybody how to become masters of their own flow. And all of the information about that will be on healingwithbrie.net.
Oh, thank you again for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again for listening to Journey of a Fearless Female. I'm your host, Paola Rosser. If you're looking for a life coach or a spiritual mentor, you can book a free discovery call with me at www.fearlessfemale.com. You can also follow me on Instagram at fearlessfemale_coach, subscribe to my YouTube channel at fearlessfemale, or find me on TikTok. I'm under at paola.rosser. And if you love this episode, make sure you hit subscribe, share it with your friends, and leave a review. I read every single review, and I truly appreciate the time you spend writing it.